The New York City Comic Con is officially underway, and I've got some friends out there. I think Drew and the guys from Comics Elite are there. AL is there in the house. I imagine Joe Corallo and a handful of other friends of the channel are also there as well, having a good time. And I was noticing that DC Comics were having a very weird opening day. All of a sudden, there was like devastating news that a handful of their real superstar creators that they actually have left, that they have access to, are leaving and making their own company. And then they're bringing back an imprint that everyone loves, Elseworlds. And we even got some ideas of what Elseworlds is going to be, which I don't know, maybe got some people excited. And then probably the more embarrassing thing, where you have Warner Brothers actually licensing out a lot of their properties to another comic book company because perhaps they don't think DC Comics can actually do a good job. So I want to cover DC Comics' very strange opening day for New York City Comic Con 2023 and my thoughts on some of these announcements. The creator-owned comics landscape is growing today as it was revealed at New York Comic Con. A new outfit of creators has been announced called Ghost Machine, comprised of creators that include Jason Fabok, Gary Frank, Brian Hitch, Geoff Johns, Lamont Maggie, Francis Manupal, Brad Meltzer, Peter J. Tomasi, and Maital Chut. The company's comics will be published through Image Comics. The company plans to announce additional talent in the months ahead, including one major superstar creator. All creators will be exclusive to Ghost Machine for their comics work after completing their already committed projects. You were seeing Geoff Johns, Gary Frank, Peter J. Tomasi. I've heard these names before. It was called Mad Ghost, an imprint at Image Comics that was announced a couple of years ago. Still waiting for Snipe and Slug from Peter J. Tomasi. I don't think that comic book even shipped a single issue, despite it was supposed to come out over, I believe, a year and a half ago. So all in all, this kind of felt like Mad Ghost, but bigger. I think it was also supposed to be an imprint at DC Comics originally. I think they announced that like 5 years ago, and then that never came to fruition. But now it's its own multimedia company. The cynic in me makes me think that this is just going to be like a hub for Netflix pitches or something like that. You get together, you write a bunch of stories that you hope get turned into streaming shows or movies perhaps in the future, kind of like Distillery, which was supposed to also be a big deal. Does anyone care about Distillery?
Doesn't ring a bell.
Although I will freely admit there's some really good comic book writing and artistic talent associated with Ghost Machine. Obviously, the biggest one in there really is Geoff Johns, synonymous with DC Comics, some of the best things DC has put out over the last 10 to 15 years. Big fan of Peter J. Tomasi. Wouldn't call him a superstar or even really an A-lister. But really, the artists involved are really, really compelling. Obviously, Gary Frank, longtime collaborator with Geoff Johns. Jason Fabok, fantastic artist, obviously did Batman the Three Jokers, among other projects with Geoff Johns. Francis Manupal, another really, really good creator. You know, I'm just thinking about Mad Ghost, and yeah, they announced we're going to have Geiger and Junkyard Joe and Snipe and Slug, and we got that one shot with all these other heroes. There's like 5 or 6 of them, and we never got Snipe and Slug. Geiger did come out on time, but even Junkyard Joe, the miniseries after that with Gary Frank and Geoff Johns, by the end, it was missing issues. I don't know if you've noticed this, but Geoff Johns doesn't seem to be able to meet deadlines anymore. Doomsday Clock at DC Comics was delayed. Justice Society of America right now, delayed. It seems like almost every project he works on is massively delayed. So while I do have an interest in what Ghost Machine is going to be and what they can do, I'm not exactly excited yet because it just feels like Mad Ghost, but now it's a multimedia company. And I don't know that like Brad Meltzer really brings a whole lot to the table. I know a lot of people like him, but I thought Identity Crisis sucked. His Justice League stuff, absolutely compelling, but he hasn't really written a whole lot of comic books in his career. And it feels like he's more interested in other things online and stuff. So I don't know that like Brad Meltzer is a big name. And really the only 2 writers you have there that are of interest to me, at least, are Geoff Johns and Peter J. Tomasi. And not to undersell what an enormous loss this is to DC Comics. Geoff Johns is synonymous with DC Comics. He's probably the last A-lister that they have left. And this is a big deal and a big loss. And the fact that they're all going to be exclusive to Ghost Machine for their comic book work is certainly going to have an impact on DC and some of the other publishers out there. We shall see how this goes, but it's certainly not a good look for DC Comics to have so many of their really best talent just up and leave all at the same time to go exclusive work on the indie scene. Makes you think that maybe DC aren't paying those page rates. Maybe they're not offering enough work right now where people are saying, screw it. Why even deal with those guys? We'll just go create our own company and see what happens. We'll have just as much job security, and it kind of gives you a negative impression of DC Comics. Another thing that gave me an odd impression of DC Comics is this other announcement DC Comics came out to New York Comic-Con 2023 with a bang this week, revealing new series, art, and more at the Elsewhere in the DC Multiverse panel. The panel revealed DC is returning to Elseworlds with a line of comic series. Gotham by Gaslight, The Kryptonian Age by Andy Diggle and Leandro Fernandez expands the mysterious and gothic world beyond the confines of Gotham City. Batman the Barbarian is a brutal and remarkable retelling of Batman's origin, set against a rugged medieval Earth, written and drawn by Greg Smallwood. Dark Knights of Steel All Winter, a 6-issue series by Jay Kristoff and Tirso Cons. Green Lantern Dark by Tate Bromble and Werther Del Adera reimagines the DC universe as a dark fantasy wasteland where monsters overrun a post-apocalyptic Earth. Batman Nightfire sees superstar Clayman and his twin brother Seth unleashed in this unflinching reimagining that sees Bruce Wayne try to rectify a devastating tragedy by traveling to the past. DC vs. Vampires World War V, the sequel by Matthew Rosenberg and Otto Schmidt. Sunlight is restored to Earth, but was it too late? When I think of DC Elseworlds, I think of really top-notch A-list talent telling stories outside the confines of the DC Comics continuity. And sometimes you can take a character and put him in a new setting, a new time frame or whatever, and see what happens. You know, Gotham by Gaslight being one of the very best examples of that. But a lot of times it's just the characters that we know doing something that they wouldn't be allowed to do within the confines of DC Comics continuity, or changing something about the character and seeing how that plays out, almost like a what if. The best example of that being like Red Sun by Mark Miller. Going too far, probably the best example is The Killing Joke, obviously by Alan Moore. And it doesn't feel like we're getting much of that. I understand Gotham by Gaslight, but why would there be a Kryptonian age? Like, that's such a weird concept. It's not like a fun, weird concept. It's just kind of like, man, they're really pulling stuff out of their asses now, aren't they? That doesn't even make sense for the story Gotham by Gaslight. I don't understand why it even exists or why it would exist. You know, and Andy Diggle is a competent writer, and sometimes he does pretty good stuff, and sometimes he drops the ball spectacularly. He's not somebody that I would be like, oh, let's relaunch an Elseworlds imprint, you know, with fucking Andy Diggle on Gotham by Gaslight. It's like they're reaching here, and maybe they just don't have the names in the Rolodex anymore that actually want to work with them. And I'm not seeing a whole lot of compelling names here. I mean, I love Greg Smallwood, and Batman the Barbarian is absolutely down my alley, and I'm going to read it just because the cover that they show looks pretty darn good. I don't know if Greg Smallwood can write, but this itself doesn't really even feel like it's within like celebrating Elseworlds history with DC Comics. It's just putting Batman with the new skin on him. And wouldn't it be cool if he was a barbarian? I agree. I would play with that toy and I'll read the comic book, and I imagine the art's going to be good. But that doesn't sound like completely compelling as a story. Like, we're not breaking ground here to where you're going to be setting the comic book industry on fire. It's just another Brave and the Bold book, but you're calling it an Elseworlds. Dark Knights of Steel All Winter. Sure, there's a reason that's the only comic book character they're showing, but you know, Dark Knights of Steel by the end, like, I could just care less. I stopped reading it after about 5 or 6 issues, and I've never fucking heard of Jay Kristoff. Why is this guy making his DC Comics debut on an Elseworlds book? Shouldn't he be doing some backup stories and proving himself? What is he, like a YA novelist? Maybe he writes YA graphic novels, and that's why he's stepping up to something like this. Like, whatever, man. Green Lantern Dark, never heard of Tate Bromble either. And then, like, why would Green Lantern work for, like, Lord of the Rings bullshit? It doesn't really even make sense for Green Lantern. Like, I understand there's some mystic stuff going on there with the power rings and everything, but it's not exactly magic. It's a little bit different than that. And, of course, it's got to be a female Green Lantern in the abyss in the apocalyptic future. And what she got to do is, like, okay, not interested in that. Batman Nightfire. I will take Clayman illustrating Batman at any time, and hopefully his brother Seth, his twin brother Seth, is just as talented as he is, but I don't know if Clayman can write. And also, Bruce Wayne going to rectify a devastating tragedy in his past sounds a whole lot like Flashpoint to me. We've already seen Flash do this. Oh, so he's going to go back and make sure that his mom and dad don't die? That's not even close to a new story. We've seen it in other multiverses, and we've even seen it in Earth Prime. You know, Tom King did that, I'm pretty sure, right? When you had the Batman Devastator guy that ended up being, I think he ended up being Dick Grayson or whatever, where Booster Gold went back in time to give Bruce Wayne a wedding present by making his parents not die or something like that. We've literally already read this story, and it might have even been illustrated by Clayman. I don't think it was, but it might have been. He was working on that series, so not exactly new stuff there, but hey, Clayman on Batman sounds like it's probably going to look good. And then Matt Rosenberg on anything. I don't care if people like DC versus Vampires. It wasn't the worst thing ever, and it's probably the most acclaimed Matthew Rosenberg will ever get in his entire life, but it wasn't that fucking compelling. It wasn't that cool. It was just Marvel Zombies, but DC Vampires. It was like Deceased, but not as good because it was written by Matthew Rosenberg. What a hack. Why did DC think that guy was going to replace James Tynion? James Tynion's not even really a good writer, but my goodness, Matthew Rosenberg makes him look like Frank fucking Miller. Like, that guy just sucks. He's terrible. So I won't be revisiting that. So I'll pick up Batman the Barbarian. Shit like that just interests me, but I don't know that it's a compelling Elseworlds story. I'll pick up Batman Nightfire, and I'll enjoy looking at the covers of Dark Knights of Steel all winter. But other than that, none of that stuff really seems all that compelling. So if you're into Elseworlds, I hope you like this, but it doesn't feel like it's celebrating Elseworlds. And one of the other things that DC always did with their Elseworlds imprint and their stories, they never had like 6 of them going on at the same time. You would get like one a year or maybe one every other year because they didn't want to like overexpose the concept. And this is definitely overexposing it because they're just grasping at straws now. It turns out when you make your DC Black Label imprint and then you decide to make everything not in continuity Black Label, it takes off the luster of it and it's harder to sell it. So they're trying to parse the stuff out again. Black Label should have been one of the coolest things DC Comics ever did in their lives, and it basically just ruined a bunch of other stuff. Shocking, DC Comics dropped the ball again. Now, this last story that came out, I just thought was kind of embarrassing. I almost feel bad for Jim Lee at this point. Dynamite Entertainment and Warner Brothers Discovery Global Consumer Products are teaming up for licensed comics in 2024. Projects on the way include Thundercats, The Flintstones, The Powerpuff Girls, Space Ghost, Johnny Quest, Wizard of Oz, We Bare Bears, with more to come. First up this February is the almighty Thundercats. Superstar creators Declan Shalvey and Drew Moss are set to helm and revitalize the franchise for comic books starting this February. It's almost like Warner Brothers Discovery forgot that they have an entire comic book publishing company that they own that's already worked with some of these characters in the past. Like, I think this is an enormous black eye on the part of DC Comics to where Warner Brothers like, I don't want them doing Thundercats. Let's just license it out. Hope we can actually make some money on that and not let these guys fuck up another property of ours. Maybe in the future, Thundercats will be worth something. We know that they were making a Powerpuff Girls movie. Hopefully things work out on that end. Space Ghost was a funny show. Personally not interested in the comic book, but I know a lot of people do like Space Ghost, and Dynamite's already kind of doing some other Wizard of Oz stuff. But I don't know. This might just be a me thing, and I might come off like an asshole here, but when I think of Dynamite Entertainment and comic books, I think about titty covers. Like, that's all I think about. It's going to take them so long for me to think about anything else with their publishing company other than just titty covers. Like, how are they going to turn Thundercats into titty covers? Are they going to have like a porn star dress up like a cat and like bend over and take a picture of her and put it on a comic book cover? It doesn't feel like it fits their brand whatsoever. I understand they're trying to do more pulpy stuff and get away from it, but it doesn't feel like Dynamite to me unless I see like some triple D's on the cover and some type of cosplay chick barely wearing anything. Maybe I'm just biased on this. The only one of these I would be excited about is Thundercats, the one they're coming out with in February. But I just read Declan Shalvey's Alien Annual 2023, and I'm not being hyperbolic. I'm not exaggerating on this. T. Franklin puts more thought and consideration in her scripts for comic books than Declan Shalvey did for that Alien Annual comic book. It's one of the worst comics I've ever read in my life. I can't believe Marvel charged $6 for it. I've never thought Declan Shalvey was all that talented, and after reading Alien Annual, I don't think he's got any talent whatsoever. So I'll check out Thundercats because I love the property and I want something good to happen, but I'm expecting less than nothing. Let's just put it that way, because that dude does not have the goods, in my opinion. Alien Annual was an absolute travesty and made T. Franklin and Titty Howard and Steve Fox look good. Let's put it that way, because he put no thought, care, consideration whatsoever. He basically shat on a piece of paper and called it a script. I probably should have made a video about it, but the video literally only would have lasted about 2.5 minutes because there was no fucking story whatsoever. I would have just been critiquing the art and how fucking stupid the concept was. Don't even get me started. I'm starting to get myself mad again just thinking about that fucking comic book and just how terrible it was. Now, we opened up the video. We were talking about Geoff Johns and Ghost Machine And if you remember, like a year and a half, maybe a little bit more than that, they actually came for Geoff Johns. They tried to get this guy canceled, and somehow he persevered. Let's go into the Wayback Machine and hear about what I had to say about Geoff Johns and what they were trying to do to cancel him, along with my good friend Comics by Perch. Definitely check this out right now. There's also a link in the video description.